Her billionaire husband left her for his first love, but her revenge move had him broken empty. The door was half open. Through the gap, Dominic Vale stood frozen, watching his ex-wife Vivian wrapped around another man. Felix, the man who had been there all along. Vivian saw him standing there and smiled. Not embarrassed, not apologetic, just satisfied. Dominic's voice came out broken. "How long?" Vivian laughed. "How long have Felix and I been together?" "Since before I contacted you, Dominic. Since before you left your wife. Since always, really. Did you actually think I wanted you back?" His world tilted. "You said you needed me. I needed your money. There's a difference." She stepped closer, her voice turning cold. "Men are so easy. Promise them they're special, and suddenly they'll destroy themselves trying to prove it. You used me. I used what you offered. And your wife, Sienna, she made it remarkably easy. Gave me a complete dossier of your secrets, your debts, your failures. Everything I needed to control you." Dominic's legs nearly gave out. Why would she do that? Vivian's smile was cruel. "Because you destroyed her first. She just armed me and stepped back to watch you learn the hard way what you refused to learn through love. Now get out of my house. You've served your purpose." That moment of total destruction didn't happen overnight. It started 6 weeks earlier with a woman who loved a man too blind to see her worth. A billionaire who mistook being needed for being loved. And an envelope that would change everything. If you've ever loved someone who couldn't see what they had, if you've ever been left for someone who didn't deserve them, if you've ever had to let someone go so they could learn the hard way, then this story is for you. I'm Mr. Hearthline. This is a story about elegance, revenge, and the difference between being needed and being chosen. Hit that like button right now if you're ready for a story that will make you rethink everything you know about love and loyalty. And subscribe because we don't hold back here. We tell the truth, even when it hurts. Let's begin. Sienna Crane knew 3 weeks before her husband told her. A wife always knows. It's in the way he guards his phone, the distance in his touch, the distraction in his eyes when you're speaking, the careful way he suddenly mentions someone's name too casually, as if the casualness itself won't give away how much he's thinking about them. She was standing in their penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Tribeca, 42nd floor. The kind of apartment that appeared in Architectural Digest with captions like "Power Couple's Urban Sanctuary." Everything was cream and gold and glass. Expensive, beautiful, cold. Sienna held a wine glass. Chateau Margaux, 1982. The kind of wine you drink when you're celebrating something or mourning, something or making a decision that will change everything. She was doing all three. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window. 34 years old. Dark hair cut in a sharp bob that framed elegant features. She wore silk loungewear that cost more than most people's. Monthly rent, but looked effortless. Sienna had always had that quality, making everything look easy, making luxury look natural, making strength look like grace. She ran her own art gallery in Soho, represented emerging artists who went on to show at the Whitney and the Guggenheim. She didn't need Dominic's money, had never needed it. That had been part of their story. The billionaire and the woman who couldn't be bought. Except now that story was ending. Behind her, in his study, Dominic was on another call. His voice carried through the open door. Low, careful, the tone he used when he didn't want to be overheard but couldn't help himself. I know it's complicated. Just give me a little more time. I promise I'll figure something out." Sienna took another sip of wine. She knew who he was talking to, had known for 3 weeks. Since the private investigator she'd hired sent the first report. Vivian Cross, the ghost, the first love, the woman who had shattered Dominic 5 years before Sienna met him, the woman who had left him for someone wealthier, someone more established, someone she thought was a better investment. That marriage had ended in scandal, divorce, public humiliation for Vivian when her husband left her for someone younger. And now, Vivian was back, reaching out to Dominic with carefully crafted messages about struggles and loneliness and mistakes she regretted. Sienna had read them all, had access to Dominic's messages because she'd always had his passwords, and he'd been too arrogant to think she'd ever use them. The messages were masterpieces of manipulation, vulnerable enough to pull at his savior complex, flattering enough to feed his ego, vague enough to keep him guessing. "I've been thinking about you, about us. About the life we could have had if I hadn't been so foolish. I'm in trouble, Dominic. Real trouble. And you're the only person I trust to help me. You were always the one who truly understood me. The one who saw me clearly. I threw that away, and I've regretted it every day since. Each message was a fishhook. And Dominic was biting. Sienna had options. She could confront him. Show him the evidence. Demand he cut contact. Women did that. Fought for their marriages. Drew boundaries. Issued ultimatums. But Sienna understood something those women didn't. You couldn't compete for someone who'd already decided you weren't enough. You couldn't logic someone out of a choice their ego had already made. And you definitely couldn't make a man value what he'd already taken for granted. So she made a different choice. She would let him go. Let him walk straight into the trap he was too blind to see. And she would ensure that when Vivienne destroyed him, and she would destroy him, he would understand exactly what he'd lost and who had armed his enemy. Dominic ended his call, walked into the living room. He looked good. He always looked good. 6'2", salt and pepper hair styled perfectly. Tailored Tom Ford, even at home. The kind of man who appeared on Forbes' 30 under 40 lists and gave TED Talks about disruption and innovation. He'd built his venture capital firm from nothing. Turned early investments in tech startups into billions. He was brilliant, driven, successful, and about to become the biggest fool in Manhattan. You're still up. He said it like it was a question, like he hadn't noticed her presence until he needed something from her. Couldn't sleep. Sienna's voice was smooth, warm even. She'd always been good at this, hiding what she felt behind what people expected to see. He moved to the bar, poured himself scotch. Macallan, 25. Another casual luxury in a life full of them. Sienna, we should talk. There it was, the opening, the moment he'd been building toward for weeks. She turned from the window, set down her wine glass with perfect precision. Of course. What's on your mind? Dominic didn't sit, stood by the bar, couldn't meet her eyes. Men never could when they were about to detonate someone's world. I got a call from Vivienne. She paused, waited. Sienna said nothing, just watched him. My ex-wife. I know who Vivienne is, darling. Sienna's voice carried just a hint of something sharp underneath the silk. You've mentioned her before. She's in trouble. His words came faster now. Rehearsed. Financial difficulties. Some legal complications. She reached out because she has no one else. No one she trusts. And you're telling me this because? Sienna already knew the answer. Wanted to hear him say it. Wanted him to commit fully so there'd be no taking it back later. Because I need to help her. Dominic finally looked at her. Guilt in his eyes, but determination too. The determination of a man who'd already decided and was just going through the motions of discussion. I'm moving back to the penthouse. The one Vivienne and I shared. Just temporarily. Just until she's stable. The room seemed to tilt. Not because Sienna was surprised. She'd known this was coming. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Made it a choice he was publicly making. A line he was crossing. Most women would have screamed. Sienna had seen it happen. The thrown glasses, the tears, the desperate why am I not enough. She'd watched friends dissolve into begging and ultimatums and threats that only push men further away. Sienna Crane was not most women. Instead, she smiled. Stood. Moved toward him with the grace of a dancer. When? She asked. Her voice steady as stone. When are you planning to leave? Dominic blinked. This wasn't the script he'd prepared for. Tonight. I told her I'd come tonight. She's waiting. Tonight. Sienna repeated the word like she was testing its weight. Well then, we should pack your things properly. You'll want to make a good impression. What? Confusion cracked his rehearsed composure. You're going to help Vivienne. The least I can do is ensure you arrive looking like the man she remembers. Sienna was already moving toward their bedroom. Come along, darling. We have work to do. He followed. Because men like Dominic always followed when women refused to perform the expected script. When the explosion they'd braced for never came. When grace replaced rage. Their master suite sprawled across the entire north wing. Windows overlooking the city. A California king bed they'd made love in countless times. Though now that Sienna thought about it, they hadn't touched each other in weeks, maybe months. The distance had grown so gradually she hadn't noticed when affection became routine, became obligation, became nothing. His closet was the size of most people's bedrooms. Custom built, cedar lined, organized by color and season and occasion. Sienna moved through it like she was selecting pieces for an exhibition, which in a way she was. Your navy Tom Ford suit. She pulled it from the rack, held it up to the light. Vivian always loved you in navy, said it matched your eyes. Remember? That charity gala where she couldn't stop touching your lapel. Dominic's face went pale. You don't have to do this. Do what? Help my husband pack? She folded the suit with hotel precision, placed it in his Louis Vuitton luggage, the luggage she'd given him for their second anniversary. I'm being supportive. Isn't that what wives do? She pulled shirts next. The white Brioni, the pale blue Ermenegildo Zegna, the charcoal Armani. Each one she'd helped him select. Each one she'd seen him wear to important meetings and intimate dinners and moments that had mattered. This tie. She held up silk. Hermes, deep burgundy. She gave you this one. Before I knew you existed. Before you were mine. You should definitely bring it. Nostalgia is powerful, don't you think? Every item was a surgical strike. Every selection a reminder of his past with Vivian, packaged with the elegance that defined everything Sienna touched. Sienna, please. His voice cracked. You're making this harder. She turned to face him fully. Harder for whom, Dominic? For you? She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn the night they met. Am I making it harder for you to abandon our marriage by refusing to fall apart? By not giving you the dramatic scene you need to feel better about what you're doing? That's not fair. No. What's not fair is you choosing a woman who already destroyed you once over a wife who's done nothing but support you. What's not fair is you mistaking her need for love and my strength for indifference. She stepped back, returned to packing. But life isn't fair, darling. You taught me that. With all your talks about disruption and creative destruction and how the market doesn't reward loyalty, she folded his cashmere sweaters. The gray one, the black one, the navy one Vivian had complimented repeatedly during their relationship. It might be cold where you're going. Vivian always kept her apartment cold. Remember? You complained about it. You'll need layers. Stop. Dominic's hands were shaking. Just stop. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you fighting? Why aren't you asking me to stay? Sienna zipped his suitcase. The sound was final, definitive, like a cell door closing. Because you've already decided. Because fighting would just delay the inevitable. Because you need to learn some lessons that can only be taught through experience. She pulled out her phone, called their driver. Martin, I need you to bring the car around. Mr. Vale is going out. She paused. No, I'll be driving him myself. 20 minutes. She hung up, looked at Dominic with eyes that had loved him and now studied him like a stranger. Go change into something comfortable for the drive. I'll finish here. He left, shell-shocked, moving on autopilot. While he was gone, Sienna made 2 final additions to his luggage. The cologne Vivian had given him years ago. Before Sienna, before everything, the scent he'd worn in his past life. And a framed photo, small, silver frame, Dominic and Vivienne from years ago. Young, happy, before the betrayal, before the pain. She'd found it in the back of his desk drawer months ago. Had known then that he'd never fully let go. Now he could have her back. All of her. Every broken promise. Every selfish choice. Every moment of pain she would inflict. 20 minutes later, Sienna loaded his luggage into the back of their Range Rover. Dominic stood beside the car like a man walking to his execution. Except he'd requested the execution, demanded it, chosen it over life. Get in. Sienna's voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. The drive across Manhattan was suffocating. Silence pressed against them like a physical thing. Dominic tried several times to speak, to explain, to justify. Each time, Sienna cut him off with perfect precision. Save it for Vivian. I'm sure she'll want to hear all about how difficult this is for you, how conflicted you feel, how you're really the victim here. That's not what I was going to say, isn't it? Sienna's hands were steady on the wheel. Because that's what men always say when they're choosing ego over love. When they're picking the woman who makes them feel necessary over the woman who makes them feel loved. She knew the way to Vivian's building. Of course she did. She'd driven past it a dozen times in the last 3 weeks, had studied it, memorized it, understood exactly where her husband was being pulled. Upper East Side, pre-war building, good address, dated interior. The lobby needed updating. The elevator was original and not in a charming way. When they pulled up to the entrance, Sienna put the car in park but didn't turn off the engine. She sat there for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the building that would become Dominic's new home. Dominic's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I am. I just have to do this. I have to help her. She has no one else." "No, Dominic." Sienna turned to look at him. Her eyes were oceans, deep, fathomless, holding knowledge he couldn't begin to understand. "You want to do this. There's a difference between have to and want to. You want to feel needed. You want to play hero. You want to believe you're the only one who can save her because it makes you feel important in a way my quiet, steady love apparently doesn't." He flinched like she'd slapped him. "But that's fine," she continued, her voice soft and deadly. "You should go. You should absolutely go in there and be her savior. Give her everything she asks for, everything she needs, everything she pretends to need. Exhaust yourself trying to fill a hole that has no bottom. Learn the difference between being needed and being used." She reached across him, opened his door. The interior light came on, harsh, exposing, because when you're done, when she's finished with you, when you've given everything and realized it was never going to be enough, you'll understand what you had with me. You'll understand what you threw away. You'll understand the difference between someone who needs you and someone who loves you. Dominic climbed out of the car like a man walking through water. Every movement heavy, wrong. Some part of him knowing this was a mistake, but his pride pushing him forward anyway. He retrieved his suitcase from the back, closed the trunk. When he looked up, Sienna had gotten out of the car too, stood beside him, on the sidewalk. The city moved around them. Taxis, pedestrians, life continuing while his ended. Sienna reached into her jacket, pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored, expensive stock, sealed with red wax. For a moment, Dominic thought it was a letter for him. Some final goodbye. But she walked past him to the mailbox at the edge of Vivian's building, slipped the envelope inside with movements that looked rehearsed, deliberate, final. "What's that?" he asked. Though some part of him didn't want to know, she turned back to him. Her smile could have cut diamonds. Insurance. Before he could ask what she meant, she was back in the car, window rolling down. She looked at him one last time. Her eyes held something he couldn't quite read. Not sadness, not anger, something else, something that looked almost like pity. "Goodbye, Dominic. I hope she's everything you remember. I hope she gives you everything you think you need. I hope you find exactly what you're looking for." Then she drove away, taillights disappearing into Manhattan traffic, leaving him standing in a driveway that didn't belong to him, holding a suitcase full of clothes that would never feel like home, watching the only woman who'd ever truly loved him disappear from his life. The front door of the building opened. Vivian stood there, backlit by the lobby light. Her smile was wide, painted, perfect. She wore a dress that was too tight, makeup that was too heavy, perfume that would be too strong. Everything about her was too much, too performed, too calculated. "Darling," she called out, her voice dripping honey and lies. "I've missed you so much. Come inside. Come home." Dominic picked up his suitcase, started walking toward her, toward the woman he thought he wanted, away from the woman he'd just destroyed. Each step felt heavier than the last, like walking through water, like some part of him knew this was wrong. But pride pushed him forward. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have seen Sienna's car stopped at the corner, might have seen her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles had gone white, might have seen the single tear that escaped before she wiped it away with angry precision. But he didn't look back. Men like Dominic never did, too busy walking toward their own destruction to notice the devastation they left behind. Sienna sat at that corner for 5 full minutes, let herself feel it. The pain, the betrayal, the grief of watching someone you love choose so poorly. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and drove home to a penthouse that would no longer carry the weight of Dominic's presence. She poured herself another glass of the Margot, put on Chopin nocturnes, the ones Dominic always found too melancholic, sat by the windows overlooking the city he'd just chosen Vivian in. And she smiled, because in 48 hours or less, Dominic Vale would understand the difference between a woman who loved him and a woman who used him. And by then, the trap she'd set would have closed so completely he'd have nowhere to go but back. Whether she'd let him in was another question entirely. Inside that envelope in Vivian's mailbox was everything Vivian would need to destroy him. Financial records showing debts Dominic had hidden, failed investments he'd concealed, business decisions that could ruin him if exposed, vulnerabilities he thought were buried, and a note in Sienna's elegant script. Since you want him so desperately, you should know exactly what you're getting. Consider this a gift from one woman to another. All the leverage you'll need to control him completely. Use it wisely. He's all yours now. Flaws, secrets, debts, and all. May you get everything you deserve from him. Sienna had compiled it over 3 weeks, while Dominic thought she was oblivious. While he'd been sneaking calls and hiding messages and thinking he was so clever, she'd been gathering ammunition, not for herself, for Vivian. Because Sienna understood something Dominic didn't. Vivian was a user, a manipulator, a woman who saw people as tools, and given the right weapons, she would dismantle Dominic piece by piece. Sienna had handed her the weapons. Now she would watch from a distance as the man who'd taken her for granted learned what it meant to be with someone who didn't love you at all. Meanwhile, Dominic stood in Vivian's apartment. It felt wrong immediately. Too quiet, too cold. The walls were bare where his and Sienna's home had been filled with art and photographs and life. The air smelled stale, unlived in, temporary, nothing like home. This is the guest room. Vivian showed him to a sparse bedroom, generic furniture, bare walls, a window overlooking a courtyard full of dead plants and broken concrete. You'll sleep here until we figure things out. Until we figure things out. The phrase was careful, distant. No invitation to her bed. No suggestion of intimacy. Just boundaries. Dominic set his suitcase down, looked around the room that felt like a hotel, like a place you stayed but never lived. I'm so glad you're here. Vivian's hand touched his arm. Light. Performative. You have no idea how much I need you. The words should have felt good. Should have validated his choice. Instead, they felt hollow. Empty. Wrong. Get some rest, she said. We have a lot to discuss tomorrow. So many problems to solve. So much I need your help with. She left him alone. Her footsteps fading down the hallway. Dominic sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, pulled out his phone. Sienna's number stared back at him from the screen. His thumb hovered over it. What would he say? I made a mistake felt too small. Come get me sounded pathetic. I love you was true, but meaningless after what he'd done. He didn't call. Put the phone down. Lay back on the bed. Stared at the ceiling. At water stains that formed patterns like maps to nowhere. And wondered why victory felt so much like defeat. Why getting what he thought he wanted left him feeling empty. Why the need he'd chased felt nothing like the love he'd abandoned. Downstairs he heard movement. Vivian retrieving her mail. He heard the mailbox open. Close. Then footsteps. Quick. Purposeful. Moving toward somewhere else in the apartment. She'd found the envelope. Vivian stood in her kitchen, hands shaking slightly as she read. First Sienna's note, then the documents. Proof of Dominic's hidden debts. His financial missteps. His careful deceptions. Details of money borrowed and not repaid. Evidence of promises broken. Records of decisions he'd hidden from everyone, including his wife. A slow smile spread across her face. This was better than she'd hoped. This was perfect. She'd wanted Dominic back for practical reasons, not romantic ones. She needed his help, his resources, his connections, needed someone to solve her problems while she focused on what mattered to her, on Felix. But this documentation, these secrets, this leverage, this gave her complete control. She could keep Dominic exactly where she wanted him, doing exactly what she needed. With no chance of escape, she pulled out her phone, called Felix. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "It's done," Vivian said softly, excitement thrumming under her words. "He's here, and it's going to be even easier than we thought." "The wife made trouble?" Felix asked, more awake now, interested. "The wife." Vivian looked at Sienna's note again, appreciation flickering. "Gave us a gift, handed me everything I need to keep him in line. Every secret, every mistake, every piece of leverage we could want. Smart woman. Smart enough to know exactly what you are." Felix's voice carried grudging respect. "Smart enough to let me destroy him for her." Vivian agreed. "She's handing him over gift, wrapped with instructions on where to hurt him most." She hung up, tucked the documents into her safe, handling them carefully, like the precious weapons they were. Then she climbed the stairs to check on her new house guest. She found him still dressed, still lying on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. "Can't sleep?" she asked from the doorway, voice sugary sweet, concern dripping from every word. "Just thinking about her." Vivian let hurt creep into her voice. "About Sienna." It was performance, but he wouldn't know that. Alex didn't answer, didn't need to. The guilt on his face said everything. Vivian walked into the room, sat on the edge of the bed, placed a manicured hand on his arm. Her touch was cold despite the warm room. "She'll be fine, Dominic. Women like her always are. They're survivors. She'll move on. She probably already has someone waiting." The suggestion landed exactly as intended. Dominic flinched, jealousy and insecurity flaring in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly. Though he didn't know anything, "That's what worries me." Vivian's smile was hidden in the darkness. "Don't worry about her. Worry about us. Worry about rebuilding what we lost. Worry about being the man I need you to be." She paused. "You are going to be that man, aren't you? You're not going to disappoint me again." There was something in her tone, something he couldn't identify. It sounded almost like a threat wrapped in velvet, like love with teeth, like sweetness with poison underneath. "I'll be whatever you need," he said, "because that's what men say when they're trying to convince themselves they made the right choice. I know you will." Vivian patted his arm like he was a good dog. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow we have a lot to discuss, so much to plan, so much you're going to help me with." She left him alone again. As her footsteps faded, Dominic closed his eyes, tried to remember why he'd wanted this so badly, tried to remember what about Vivian had pulled him away from Sienna, tried to recall the feeling that had made abandoning his marriage seem reasonable. All he could see was Sienna's face as she'd driven away, the calm in her eyes, the absolute control in her posture, the smile that said she knew something he didn't, that said she'd already seen how this would end. That envelope she'd placed in the mailbox. Insurance, she'd called it. Insurance against what? What had she given Vivian? What power had she handed over? Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, his dreams were haunted. Two women, one who'd loved him completely, one who'd never loved him at all. By morning, both truths would become impossible to ignore. Dominic woke to the smell of coffee and voices drifting up from downstairs. For a disoriented moment he expected to see Sienna beside him, expected their bedroom with its familiar walls and her collection of art books on the nightstand, expected the soft morning light filtering through curtains she'd chosen. Instead, he found himself in a sparse guest room, generic furniture, curtains that didn't quite block the harsh morning sun. Reality crashed back. He'd left. He was at Vivian's. He'd chosen this. The voices downstairs grew clearer as sleep faded. Vivian's laugh, high, performative, followed by a deeper male voice he didn't recognize. Dominic dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, hadn't thought to bring enough, hadn't planned beyond the romantic notion of reunion, made his way downstairs following the sound. Vivian stood at the counter in a silk robe, pouring coffee into expensive cups that didn't match the rundown state of the rest of the apartment. Across from her sat a man Dominic's age, maybe slightly younger, dressed in Brioni, wearing a Rolex that cost more than most people's cars. He had the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to prove himself, never having to work for anything. Dominic. Vivian's voice was too bright, too cheerful for someone who'd supposedly been struggling. Perfect timing. I want you to meet someone important." The man stood, extended his hand with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Felix Ashford, great to finally meet you. Vivian's told me so much about you. All good things, I promise." His grip was firm. His smile was predatory. Dominic disliked him immediately. Something about the way Felix looked at Vivian. The familiarity in his posture. The comfort in his presence here. "Felix is my—" Vivian paused as if searching for the right word. "Very close friend. He's been helping me through some difficult situations." "Close friend," Dominic repeated, tasting something bitter. "That's right." Felix settled back into his chair. Completely comfortable in Vivian's kitchen, in her space, in her life. His hand rested on the table where Vivian's had been moments before, occupying the same space with the same ownership. "Vivian and I have known each other for quite a while now. I've been trying to help her navigate some challenging circumstances." Vivian's expression shifted, vulnerability replacing brightness like an actress changing masks. It looked rehearsed, practiced. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about, Dominic. Why I reached out. Why I told you I needed you." She sat down at the table, gestured for Dominic to join them. He did, though everything in his gut told him to run. Told him this wasn't right. Told him he'd made a terrible mistake. But pride kept him in his chair. He'd left Sienna for this. Couldn't admit doubt now. "I'm in trouble," Vivian said softly, her eyes meeting his with calculated sincerity. "Real trouble. I made some poor decisions with people I thought I could trust. Got involved in situations that seemed fine at first but turned complicated. And now I'm facing consequences I can't handle alone." Felix nodded gravely, playing his part perfectly. "We've tried every option we can think of, every avenue, but the problems keep getting worse. Vivian's barely been sleeping, barely eating. She's terrified." "I'm sorry to hear that," Dominic said carefully, his protective instincts warring with his suspicions. "But I'm not sure what this has to do with me." "How can I help?" Vivian reached across the table, placed her hand over his. Her skin was cold despite the warm kitchen. "You've always been brilliant at solving impossible problems. You see solutions where other people see dead ends. You make sense of chaos. You're strategic, thoughtful, capable. I know it's asking a lot. I know I have no right after how I treated you, but I was hoping you might look at my situation, give me advice, help me figure out if there's any way to fix what I've broken." The flattery was laid on thick, each word chosen to appeal to his ego, to make him feel essential. But it worked. Dominic felt his chest expand, felt the familiar sensation of being needed, of being the smartest person in the room, of being irreplaceable. "I could take a look," he heard himself saying, even as part of him screamed not to. "No promises. But I could review your situation and see if there's anything I can suggest." Felix's smile widened, triumphant. "That would be incredible. Really, man. We'd be so grateful. Vivian's been saying you were the only one who could help. I'm starting to see why." They spent the next several hours at the dining room table. Papers spread everywhere. Felix and Vivian explaining their complicated web of debts and obligations. The details were vague, the specifics deliberately fuzzy, but the picture they painted was of two people in over their heads, drowning in problems not entirely of their making. Dominic listened, asked questions, began to see patterns. It was bad, really bad, but maybe not unfixable. Maybe not if someone smart was willing to take certain risks, willing to help in specific ways, willing to put their own reputation and resources on the line. By afternoon, his mind was churning with possibilities. This was familiar territory. Problem solving, being essential, being the hero. He'd forgotten how good it felt to be desperately needed rather than quietly appreciated. As Felix gathered his papers to leave, Dominic caught fragments of conversation at the door. Low voices, but words carried. Knew he'd bite. Felix's voice. "Easier than we thought. Exactly as planned." Vivian's laugh. "He's already hooked." Dominic chose to ignore it. Chose to believe he'd misheard. Chose to rationalize. Because the alternative was too devastating. That he'd destroyed his marriage for a manipulation. That evening, Vivian made dinner. Nothing elaborate. Just pasta and salad. But she served it with candles, with wine in crystal glasses that looked expensive but were probably cheap. with a softness in her expression that reminded Dominic of who they'd been years ago, before betrayal, before pain. "Thank you for today," she said, twirling pasta on her fork with practiced delicacy. "For listening, for caring enough to try to help, for being here when I have no right to ask. Of course, I told you I'd be here for you. That's why I came. I know you did." She set down her fork, her gaze intense. "Dominic, I need to be honest with you about something I should have told you a long time ago." His stomach tightened. "Okay, when we broke up, when I left you before, that was the biggest mistake of my life." Her voice wavered convincingly, tears gathering. "I was young and stupid. I thought I wanted excitement, thought the grass was greener, thought you weren't enough, that there was something better out there. But I was wrong, so wrong. Nothing was ever as good as what we had. Vivian, let me finish, please." She reached for his hand again, her grip desperate. "I've spent so long regretting what I did to you. Years wishing I could go back and make different choices. Years wondering what our life could have been if I hadn't been so foolish. And when things started falling apart for me, when everything was crashing down, all I could think was that I needed you, that you were the only person who'd ever really understood me, the only man who ever really saw me." The words should have sounded romantic. Instead, they sounded like a speech she'd memorized. Lines delivered with just enough emotion to be convincing but not enough to be real. But Dominic wanted to believe them, needed to believe them. Because if Vivian's words were lies, then he'd destroyed his marriage for nothing. Hurt Sienna for no reason, thrown away love for manipulation. "I'm here now," he said quietly, squeezing her hand. "That's what matters. We can start over." "Yes." Her smile was victorious, though she disguised it as relief. "You're here, and maybe if we can get through this crisis together, maybe we could have a second chance. Maybe we could be what we should have been the first time, what we were meant to be before I ruined everything." His heart beat faster, with hope, with possibility, with the seductive lie that mistakes could be undone. "You really mean that?" "I do." She stood, walked around the table, stood beside his chair. Her fingers traced along his shoulder, his neck, familiar patterns from years ago, muscle memory. "But I need to know you're really here, Dominic, really committed, not just to helping with my problems, but to us, to me, to building something real." He tilted his head back to look at her. "How do I prove that?" She bent down, her lips close to his ear, her breath deliberately warm. "Help me. Show me that I was right to believe in you. Show me that you're the man I always knew you could be. Do that, and I'll be yours again, completely, the way it should have been all along." Every alarm in his head should have been screaming. Every instinct should have told him this was manipulation, that he was being played, that her words were crafted to hook into his ego and vanity. But his ego was louder than his instincts. His vanity drowned out reason. "I'll do it," he said, committing without knowing what he was committing to. "I'll help you, whatever it takes." Her smile was hidden in his hair as she held him, her expression triumphant where he couldn't see. "I knew you would. You've always been my hero." Upstairs in her safe sat Sienna's envelope, the insurance policy that would keep Dominic in line if he tried to back out, if he started to see through the performance. But Vivian didn't think she'd need it yet. Men like Dominic controlled themselves, really. You just had to point them in the right direction and let their ego do the rest. That night when Dominic reached for her in the darkness, when his hands found her waist and his lips sought her neck with the familiarity of someone who'd been here before, Vivian turned away, cold, absolute. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice carrying just enough regret to sound authentic. "When things are fixed, when you've proven yourself, when you've shown me I can trust you not to disappoint me again, then we'll have everything." He lay awake beside her cold back, staring at the ceiling, wondering why achieving what he wanted felt so hollow, why being needed felt more like being used. Across town in her mother's guest room, Sienna lay awake too. She'd driven to her childhood home after leaving Dominic, couldn't bear the empty penthouse yet. Her mother had been waiting, arms open, no questions, just love. Now Sienna stared at her own ceiling, knowing exactly what was happening in Vivian's apartment. She'd predicted every move, anticipated every manipulation, understood the game being played because she'd researched Vivian thoroughly, knew her patterns, her methods, her cruelty. Tomorrow, Sienna would start putting her own life back together, would remember who she was before she became Dominic's wife, before she made herself smaller to make him feel bigger. But tonight she let herself imagine the moment when Dominic would finally understand, when the scales would fall, when he'd see Vivian for what she was, see himself for what he'd become. It would hurt him, destroy him probably, break something that might never heal. And a small dark part of Sienna's heart whispered, good. Let him learn, let him suffer, let him understand what it means to give everything and receive nothing. The trap was closing, and Dominic Hopkins was too blind to see the bars. Days blurred together in Vivian's apartment, each one bleeding into the next with uncomfortable familiarity that never quite became comfort. Dominic threw himself into helping, spending hours analyzing her problems, making calls to contacts who might help, mapping out solutions to situations that became more complex the deeper he dug. The more he investigated, the more questions emerged, decisions that made no sense, choices that seemed designed to create problems rather than solve them, arrangements that benefited everyone except Vivian. But whenever he raised concerns, whenever he pointed out inconsistencies or questioned the narrative, Vivian had explanations ready. I trusted the wrong advisor, she'd say, eyes filling with tears. I was pressured into bad decisions by people who took advantage of my vulnerability. I was naive. They exploited me. And Dominic would feel guilty for doubting her, feel like he was kicking her when she was down, feel like he was being the kind of man who didn't trust women. So he stopped asking difficult questions, focused on finding solutions instead, on being the hero she claimed to need. It was during this time that the small cruelties began, subtle at first, so subtle Dominic almost missed them. Are you wearing that? Vivian asked one morning as he came down for coffee. Her tone was light, almost playful. But there was an edge beneath it. What's wrong with it? Nothing, I suppose. If you're not worried about looking your best, if you don't care about making a good impression, but you look. She paused as if searching for a kind word. Sloppy, like you've given up on yourself. Dominic looked down at his shirt. Sienna had picked it out, had said it brought out his eyes, had told him he looked handsome in it. Now it felt wrong, shabby, inadequate. He went back upstairs and changed. When he came down in a different shirt, Vivian smiled with approval. Much better. You should trust my judgment on these things, Dominic. I know what works. Melissa clearly didn't teach you anything about style. The mention of Sienna felt like a slap. But Dominic said nothing, drank his coffee, pretended the criticism didn't sting. The next day she commented on how he loaded the dishwasher. That's not how it's done. Honestly, did no one ever teach you anything? Then it was how he folded towels, how he parked the car, how he chewed his food, how he breathed too loudly at night. Each correction delivered with a laugh, as if joking, as if all in good fun, as if she was just trying to help him improve. But the criticisms accumulated, each one small enough to dismiss alone. Together they formed a toxin that seeped into his confidence. Each comment chipped away at his self-worth, left him constantly second-guessing, constantly inadequate, constantly failing tests he didn't know he was taking. Felix's presence became more frequent, more intrusive, more obviously territorial. He'd show up for breakfast, stay through lunch, linger into evening. He had keys, Dominic noticed, walked through rooms like he owned them, opened the refrigerator without asking, sprawled on the couch like it was his furniture, touched Vivian's shoulder in passing with familiarity that made Dominic's jaw tighten. Felix is just affectionate with everyone, Vivian explained when Dominic finally mentioned it. It's how some people are. You wouldn't understand. You're too uptight, too rigid. The criticism embedded in the explanation wasn't lost on Dominic. Another flaw added to the growing list. The comparisons started innocuously enough, small observations that built into relentless pattern. Felix fixed the leaking faucet upstairs. Took him hardly any time. He's so capable, so handy. Not like some people who need to call professionals for everything. Felix suggested this wine. He knows everything about vintages. He's so cultured, so sophisticated. Isn't it delicious? Don't you wish you knew about these things? Felix thinks I should handle things differently. He's so innovative in his thinking, so creative, so much smarter about these situations than most people. Felix thinks. Felix knows. Felix does. Felix succeeds where others fail. Each mention felt like a paper cut, small but stinging, accumulating into 1,000 tiny wounds that bled Dominic's confidence away. Then came the nights, the terrible, lonely, rejecting nights. Dominic would reach for Vivienne in the darkness, his hand finding her waist, his lips seeking her neck. She'd been his once. That muscle memory remained. Not tonight, Dominic. Her voice flat, dismissive. I'm exhausted. I can't deal with this right now. Why are you always so needy? Tomorrow then. Maybe tomorrow we could. We'll see. Maybe when you've made more progress helping me. Maybe when there's something to celebrate. Maybe when you've proven you're worth my time. She'd turn away, her back a wall, her silence a rejection more devastating than any argument. Night after night the same script, reaching, turning away, the rejection becoming routine, becoming expected, becoming normal. He began to wonder if she even wanted him there, if this whole situation was just mistake compounded by mistake, if he'd destroyed his marriage for nothing. But then, morning would come. She'd smile at him over coffee, mention something about their future together, and he'd convince himself things would get better. Once everything was fixed, once he'd proven himself, once he'd earned his place. That's what she'd promised. That's what he was working toward. One evening, Dominic found documents spread across the dining room table, financial records he didn't remember sharing, details of debts he'd hoped to keep private, mistakes he thought were buried. Where did you get these? His voice tight. Vivienne looked up from her laptop, expression innocent. You must have left them out. I was just reviewing everything, trying to understand the full picture. I didn't leave these out. I've never shown you these. These are private. We're partners in this, Dominic. What's private between partners? She closed her laptop with deliberate slowness. Unless you're hiding things from me. Are you hiding things? Should I be worried about trusting you? No. These are sensitive. Everything about our situation is sensitive, she interrupted, voice hardening. But if we're going to work together, if we're going to build something, I need to know everything. I need complete transparency. Or should I assume you're not as committed as you claimed? He backed down, as she knew he would. She'd positioned it as a test of loyalty. He couldn't fail tests anymore. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just stressed. I know you are. Her hand touched his cheek, gentle but somehow condescending. That's why you're making poor decisions. That's why you're being sensitive about things that don't matter. You need to trust me, Dominic. We're helping each other. Later he'd realized she'd made his boundary into his fault, his privacy into his paranoia. But in the moment he accepted her version of events. That night he lay awake listening to sounds from elsewhere in the house. Vivienne's laughter, light and genuine in a way it never was with him. Felix's deeper voice responding. Were they downstairs? Working late? Or were they something else? He pushed the thought away. He was being paranoid, being sensitive, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind drifted to Sienna, to their home, to the life he'd abandoned. She'd never criticized his shirts, never compared him unfavorably to other men, never made him feel inadequate. When he reached for her in the night, she'd turned toward him, not away. She'd welcomed him, made him feel loved instead of tolerated. He picked up his phone, opened messages to her. No texts since he'd left. The empty conversation mocked him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. I miss you seemed pathetic. I made a mistake seemed too late. How are you seemed insulting. He typed nothing, put the phone down, stared at the ceiling until dawn. Downstairs, Vivienne and Felix sat close on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. He's breaking faster than I expected, Felix observed. Good. The faster he breaks, the faster we get what we need. You don't feel bad? Not even a little? Vivienne laughed, cold and clear. For what? He left his wife to come here. He made his choices. I'm just showing him the consequences. Still, he really thinks you're going to love him again. Men always think their love is enough to change women who never loved them in the first place. She lifted her head, looked at Felix with genuine affection. They never learn. How much longer do we need him? Until he's given us everything we need. until we've extracted every possible benefit. Then we'll cut him loose." Felix kissed her forehead with real tenderness, the warmth she withheld from Dominic. Upstairs, Dominic finally fell asleep, dreaming of Sienna's smile, waking to Vivian's cold assessment of everything he did wrong. The poisoned paradise was working exactly as designed. Weeks passed like water torture, each day the same but worse. Dominic working 18-hour stretches, analyzing Vivian's situation, making calls to contacts who could help, mapping solutions to problems that multiplied the deeper he dug. His appearance began to change. The mirror showed a man he barely recognized. Thinner, shadows under his eyes like bruises, a tightness around his mouth from words swallowed and pain suppressed. He looked haunted, defeated, like someone who'd lost more than he'd gained and was only beginning to understand the trade he'd made. The criticisms never stopped. They evolved, became sharper, more frequent, more cutting. "You're slouching again. Makes you look weak. Felix never slouches. That's your solution? Really? I expected better from someone with your reputation, though I suppose that reputation is becoming rather questionable these days. Felix would have figured this out by now. Maybe I should have asked him for help instead. Maybe I made a mistake thinking you were up to this." Each comment landed like a punch. Dominic tried harder, worked longer, pushed himself further, desperate to prove he wasn't weak or stupid or inadequate, desperate to earn the love she kept promising but never delivering. His phone calls to business contacts became increasingly desperate. People who used to take his calls immediately now sent him to voicemail. Associates who'd valued his opinion now made excuses about being busy. His reputation was eroding in real time. Word was spreading. Dominic Vale left his wife for his ex. Dominic Vale is helping his ex-wife with some shady situation. Dominic Vale made guarantees he shouldn't have made. Dominic Vale's judgment is compromised. He didn't realize how bad it had gotten until he ran into a former colleague at a coffee shop. The man's face when he saw Dominic was pure discomfort. "Dominic, hey." The colleague looked around like he was planning his escape route. "How are things?" "Good. Busy. Helping with a complex situation." Dominic tried to sound confident, professional, like the man he used to be. "Right. Yeah, I heard something about that." The colleague shifted his weight. "Look, man, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but people are talking, and not in a good way. You might want to be careful. It's fine. Everything's under control." "Is it? Because from the outside it looks like you're making some questionable decisions." The colleague lowered his voice. "Your wife was great, Dominic. Sienna was class. And you left her for Vivian Cross? Everyone knows what Vivian is. You don't understand the situation. Maybe not, but I understand optics. And right now yours are terrible." The colleague pulled out his wallet, paid for his coffee. "Take care of yourself. Seriously." He left. Dominic stood there holding his coffee, hands shaking, realizing that while he'd been focused on helping Vivian, his entire professional life had been falling apart around him. That evening he tried to talk to Vivian about it, about his concerns, about the toll this was taking, about needing some acknowledgement of what he was sacrificing. She listened with a bored expression, then sighed like he was a child complaining about homework. "Are you seriously making this about you right now?" Her voice was ice. "I'm the one in crisis, Dominic. I'm the one who needs help. And all you can talk about is your reputation, your comfort. How selfish can you be?" "That's not what I meant. You know what? Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should have asked someone else for help. Someone stronger. Someone who doesn't fall apart the moment things get difficult. No, please, I'm sorry. I'm just tired. I'll do better." Her expression softened slightly, calculated. "You're right. You're tired. You're working so hard for me." She moved closer, touched his face. "I appreciate it. I do. And when this is all over, we'll have everything we've been waiting for. I promise." The promise was empty. He was starting to understand that, but he clung to it anyway, because the alternative was admitting he'd destroyed his marriage for nothing. Meanwhile, across town, Sienna was thriving. She'd moved back into the penthouse, reclaimed the space, made it hers in a way it had never quite been when Dominic lived there. She'd redecorated slightly. Nothing major. Just enough to signal that this was a new chapter. New art on the walls from artists she represented. Fresh flowers she arranged herself. Books she'd always wanted to read but never had time for when she was managing Dominic's needs. Her gallery was flourishing. A show she'd curated got written up in the Times. 3 pieces about emerging female artists redefining contemporary portraiture. The opening had been packed. Sales were strong. Her reputation in the art world was growing. She'd joined a pottery class, something she'd always wanted to try. Her hands covered in clay, creating something beautiful from nothing. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Her friends had rallied. Women who'd watched her subsume herself in her marriage now celebrated her rediscovery. Girls' nights, book clubs, yoga classes, long brunches where they talked about art and ambition and everything except Dominic, though occasionally his name would come up. Always with pity. "Have you heard from him?" Her best friend Corinne asked over wine one evening. "No, nothing." Sienna swirled her glass, watching the legs form and fall. "I don't expect to. You really think Vivienne will destroy him?" "I know she will. I gave her the blueprint. Do you ever regret that? Arming her like that?" Sienna considered the question. Honest, no. He needed to learn, and he wouldn't have believed me if I'd tried to warn him. Some lessons can only be taught through pain. What if he comes back? Then he comes back different, or not at all. Either way, I'll be fine. And she meant it. That was the revelation. She was fine. Better than fine. She was remembering who she'd been before she became Dominic's wife. Before she'd made herself smaller. Before she'd confused supporting someone with disappearing into them. One evening, a man brought her takeout. Owen, a curator from a partner gallery. They'd been working on a collaborative show. He'd mentioned she probably wasn't eating while working late. Showed up with Thai food and a smile. They ate together, talked about art, about the industry, about favorite pieces and artists who'd influenced them. It was easy, comfortable, no agenda, just 2 people who enjoyed each other's company. When he left, Sienna found herself smiling, not because Owen was a romantic prospect, but because she'd forgotten what it felt like to have a conversation with a man who valued her mind, who listened when she spoke, who didn't need her to be anything except herself. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to rediscover yourself after losing yourself in someone else, take a second and hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting to the good part. The part where everything Sienna predicted comes true. The part where Dominic learns the hardest lesson of his life. Back at Vivienne's apartment, the financial trap was about to spring. Dominic had signed documents over the past weeks. Guarantees, CEO signatures, personal assurances on loans and investments and ventures that Vivienne and Felix had presented as necessary, as temporary, as routine. He'd signed them because he trusted Vivienne, because he was too tired to read the fine print, because questioning felt like admitting he didn't believe in her, because his ego wouldn't let him admit he might be making mistakes. Now, those documents were coming due. The obligations were being called, and Dominic was personally liable for amounts that made his stomach drop. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Vale? This is calling from Cordova Financial. We need to discuss the guarantees you made on the Cross Sutton venture. They've defaulted, and per the terms you agreed to, you're personally liable for the full amount." Dominic's mouth went dry. What amount? $7.3 million. Due in 30 days. We'll be sending formal documentation but wanted to give you advance notice. There must be some mistake. I didn't guarantee that much. You signed the documents, Mr. Vale. Your signature is on file. 30 days. The call ended. Dominic sat frozen. $7.3 million. He had resources, but not liquid, not immediately accessible, not without major financial restructuring. His phone rang again. Different bank, different obligation, another guarantee coming due, then another call, and another. By the end of the day, he'd received notice of obligations totaling over $20 million. All personally guaranteed, all his responsibility, all due within weeks. He confronted Vivienne that evening, documents spread across her dining table, his hands shaking with rage and fear and the terrible understanding that he'd been played. "What is this?" His voice was barely controlled. "These guarantees, these amounts. I didn't know I was signing on for this much." Vivienne looked at the documents with manufactured surprise. "You signed them, Dominic. You read them. You agreed. I trusted you. You said they were a routine. You said the risk was minimal. I said what I believed at the time. She shrugged. Things changed. Deals fell through. It's not my fault you didn't do your own due diligence. Not your fault. These are your ventures. Your deals. Your problems that you volunteered to help with. She stood, voice hardening. No one forced you to sign anything, Dominic. You're a big boy, a brilliant businessman. Or so everyone says. Though I'm starting to wonder if that reputation was always more myth than reality. The insult landed like a slap. You manipulated me. I gave you opportunities to help me. You chose to take them. And now you're facing consequences and suddenly it's my fault? She laughed. How typically male. Take credit when things go well. Blame women when they don't. I've given you everything. Weeks of my life. My expertise. My resources. My reputation. And I've given you nothing? She moved closer. Eyes cold. I've given you a place to stay. Food to eat. A purpose. Someone to save. Isn't that what you wanted? To feel necessary? The truth of it cut deep. She saw it. Smiled. Face it, Dominic. You came here because your ego needed feeding. Because your wife was too complete. Too whole. She didn't need you the way I pretended to. And that made you feel useless. So you came running when I called. Desperate to matter to someone. Desperate to be the hero. Well, congratulations. You're the hero of your own destruction. She walked to the door, opened it. I have plans tonight. With Felix. We're going to dinner. Somewhere expensive. Maybe you can figure out how to pay for it since you're about to owe everyone in Manhattan. She left, the door closing with finality. Dominic stood surrounded by documents that represented his financial ruin, understanding that he'd signed away his security for a woman who'd never cared about him at all. His phone buzzed. Text messages. People who'd heard about his obligations. Colleagues questioning his judgment. Associates distancing themselves. His reputation collapsing in real time. He opened his banking app. Started calculating what he had versus what he owed. The numbers didn't work. Even liquidating everything. He'd be short. He'd have to sell assets. Take massive losses. Destroy wealth he'd spent years building. All for Vivian, who was currently out to dinner with Felix, laughing at him probably, celebrating how thoroughly she'd played him. Dominic's hands clenched into fists. Rage warred with despair. How had he been so blind? How had he missed every red flag? Every warning sign? Every obvious manipulation? Because you wanted to be blind, a voice in his head whispered. Because seeing the truth would mean admitting you destroyed your marriage for nothing. Hurt Sienna for no reason. Chose ego over love. He thought about Sienna, about how she'd packed his bags with such care, how she'd driven him here, how she'd smiled like she knew exactly what would happen. Insurance, she'd called that envelope. Insurance that he'd learn his lesson, that Vivian would destroy him using weapons Sienna provided. His wife had predicted everything, had seen through Vivian immediately, had given her the tools for his destruction and stepped back to watch, because he wouldn't have believed Sienna if she'd warned him, would have accused her of jealousy, of trying to control him, of not trusting him. So she'd let him learn the hard way, let him walk into the trap, let him face consequences that would teach what love couldn't. And now he was broken, with nowhere to go and no one to blame but himself. That night Dominic barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes he saw numbers, debts, obligations, the mathematical proof of his stupidity. When he did sleep, nightmares came. Vivian's laughter, Felix's smug smile, Sienna's face as she'd driven away, that knowing look that said she'd already seen this ending. Morning came harsh and unforgiving. Vivian returned just after dawn. She didn't explain where she'd been, didn't apologize for leaving, just made coffee like nothing had happened. We need to talk, Dominic said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. So talk. She didn't look at him, scrolled through her phone while the coffee brewed. I can't cover these obligations, not all of them, not without destroying everything I've built. That sounds like a you problem, Vivian. These are your ventures, your deals. You need to help me figure out how to restructure this. She finally looked up, expression bored. Why would I do that? Because I helped you. Because you asked me to. And you did. Very helpful. Thank you. She poured coffee. 1 cup. Didn't offer him any. But your signatures are on those documents, Dominic, not mine. Your guarantees, your obligations, your problem. You used me. I used what you offered. There's a difference. She sipped her coffee, savored it. You volunteered to be the hero. I just let you, gave you problems to solve, made you feel important, stroked your ego exactly how you needed, and you ate it up. Why? His voice broke on the word. If you never wanted me, if this was always about using me, why go through all this? Because I could. Simple as that. She set down her cup. Because Felix and I needed help with some ventures. Because you have money and connections. Because you're easy to manipulate. She smiled. And because watching prideful men realize they're nothing special is surprisingly satisfying. Felix. Dominic's stomach clenched. How long have you two been together? The whole time. Before I contacted you. During everything. Always. She laughed at his expression. Did you really think I wanted you back? After Felix? He's better than you in every possible way, Dominic. Smarter. Richer. Better in bed. Better at everything. Each word was a knife. Precisely placed. Maximum damage. Then, why bring me into this at all? I told you. We needed help. Felix suggested reaching out to you. Thought you'd be perfect. Rich enough to be useful. Egotistical enough to be manipulated. And still pathetic enough to come running when his ex-wife called. She moved toward the door. We were right. You performed exactly as predicted. I loved you. The confession came out broken. Pathetic. No. You loved the idea of being needed. You loved feeling superior to someone who'd rejected you once. You loved proving you were the bigger person, the hero, the savior. She opened the door. But you never loved me. You don't even know me. You love a fantasy. And now that fantasy is going to cost you everything. Where are you going? Out, away from you. She paused in the doorway. I want you gone by the time I get back. Out of my apartment. Out of my life. You've served your purpose. Felix and I are done with you. And if I refuse, she pulled out her phone. Showed him the screen. Photos of documents. The ones from Sienna's envelope. His hidden debts. His failures. His secrets. Then I release these to every media outlet in New York. I destroy what's left of your reputation so completely you'll never recover. I make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of fraud you are. Sienna gave you those. He whispered, understanding fully now. The envelope, the insurance, his wife arming his enemy. She did. Very thorough woman, your ex. She knew exactly what I'd need to control you. Gave it to me gift-wrapped. She even included a note explaining why. Vivian smiled, said you destroyed her first. So she was handing you over with instructions on where to hurt you most. I have to respect that level of elegant revenge. Why would she do that? Because you earned it. Vivian's voice was matter-of-fact. Cold. You left a woman who loved you for a woman who'd already destroyed you once. You chose ego over devotion. She just ensured you'd learn the lesson completely. Made sure Vivian would have everything needed to dismantle you piece by piece. And I did. Beautifully. She checked her watch. You have 2 hours. Pack your things. Get out. Disappear. And if I see you again, those documents go public. Understand? Dominic couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. Just nodded. Good. She walked out. Left him standing in an apartment that had never been home. Surrounded by the wreckage of his own choices. He packed, mechanically, the same suitcase Sienna had filled with such care weeks ago. But this time, he packed alone, with shaking hands, with the understanding that he'd lost everything. Everything. His marriage, his reputation, his financial security, his dignity, his future. All gone. All destroyed. All his own fault. He called a car service. Couldn't afford a Uber Black anymore. Just regular Uber. Loaded his suitcase. Left the building where he'd thought he'd find love. Found only destruction. The driver asked where to. Dominic didn't know. Couldn't go back to the penthouse. That was Sienna's. Couldn't go to friends. He didn't have any anymore. Couldn't check into a nice hotel. Couldn't afford it. Just drive. He said, I'll figure it out. They drove through Manhattan. Past his old office building. past restaurants he'd frequented, past the life he'd had and thrown away. Everything looked different now, tainted, ruined. His phone buzzed constantly. Creditors, associates, people wanting answers about the rumors spreading, about his obligations, about his spectacular fall from grace. He turned it off. Couldn't face any of it. The driver eventually stopped at a cheap hotel in Queens, the kind with hourly rates and questionable stains. Nothing like the luxury Dominic was accustomed to, but it was what he could afford now. He checked in, paid cash, went to a room that smelled like bleach and desperation, sat on the edge of a bed that sagged in the middle, and finally let himself break. Sobs came from somewhere deep, gut-wrenching, the sound of a man who'd destroyed everything and finally understood what he'd done, who he'd hurt, what he'd lost. He cried for hours, until there was nothing left, until he was empty, hollow, just a shell of who he'd been. When the tears finally stopped, Dominic looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was a stranger, broken, pathetic, everything he'd never wanted to be. His phone was still off. He turned it back on. The messages were overwhelming, but one number wasn't there. Sienna. Nothing from her. Not a single text. Not a call. Just silence. The silence was worse than anything, because it meant she'd moved on, meant she was fine without him, meant he'd been so easy to replace, to forget. You've been watching for almost an hour now. If this story is making you feel something, drop a comment about what you'd do in Sienna's position. Would you take him back? Would you let him suffer? Would you forget? Let me know. And hit that like button if you're Team Sienna, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Days became weeks. Dominic lived in that cheap hotel. Couldn't afford better. His accounts were frozen. His assets tied up in legal proceedings. Creditors circling like sharks. He was functionally broke. All his billions trapped in structures and investments he couldn't liquidate fast enough. He found work where he could, consulting for a fraction of what he used to charge. Small projects for people who either didn't know about his fall or were willing to overlook it for cheap expertise. It was humiliating, degrading. A man who'd run billion-dollar deals now helping small businesses with basic strategy. But it was survival. Barely. The social destruction was worse than the financial. His name had become a punchline, a cautionary tale, a meme. Don't pull a Dominic Vale became shorthand for catastrophically stupid relationship decisions. He heard it everywhere. At coffee shops, at the gym, strangers discussing his downfall like it was entertainment. Did you hear about Dominic Vale? Left his perfect wife for his ex, got completely played, lost everything. What an idiot. Everyone knew what Vivian Cross was. Everyone except him, apparently. His wife was too good for him anyway. Sienna Crane is thriving now. Saw her at a gallery opening. Looked amazing, happy, free. The gossip was constant, inescapable. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. Some with pity, most with judgment. A few with outright mockery. His mother called once. The conversation was brief, painful. "I'm ashamed of you." Her voice was cold, disappointed in a way that cut deeper than anger. "Sienna was the best thing that ever happened to you, and you threw her away for that woman. For ego. For stupidity. Don't call me until you've figured out how to fix what you've broken. If it can even be fixed." She hung up. Dominic stared at his phone. Even his own mother had chosen Sienna's side. Not that there were sides. There was just right and wrong. And Dominic had been catastrophically wrong. His sister texted, more compassionate but equally brutal. "Sienna called me. She's heartbroken but handling it with more grace than you deserve. What were you thinking? Actually, don't answer. I don't want to hear your excuses. Just know you did this. You chose this. This is who you are now." Even his sister, even family, everyone had seen what Sienna was worth. Everyone except him. He tried reaching out to former colleagues, people he'd mentored, helped, given opportunities. Most didn't answer. The few who did were carefully neutral, professionally distant. "Dominic, I don't think we should work together right now. Maybe later. Much later. Later." That polite word that meant never. That gentle phrase that meant lose my number. One evening, desperate for human connection, Dominic went to a bar he used to frequent. The bartender recognized him. Something changed in his expression. Not quite pity, not quite judgment. Something in between. A woman sat down next to him, mid-30s, professional looking. She ordered a drink, glanced at him, did a double take. "You're Dominic Vale." Not a question. An accusation. Yeah, the guy who left Melissa Sienna Swift for his ex-wife. The one who got played. Her name is Sienna Crane, he corrected quietly. "And yeah, that's me." She sipped her drink, studied him. "I know Sienna. We're in the same professional network. She's doing really well, better than she has in years. Good. She deserves to be happy." "Yeah, she does." The woman's voice was cold. "You know what everyone says? That she's finally free, finally has time for herself, finally stopped making herself small for a man who couldn't see what he had." The words landed like punches. Accurate, devastating, true. She seems lighter, happier, like a weight's been lifted. The woman stood, leaving money for her drink. "We all knew she was too good for you. We just hoped you'd realize it before you did something catastrophically stupid. Guess you proved us all right." She walked away, left Dominic alone with the crushing knowledge that everyone had seen it. Everyone had known. Everyone except him. He left the bar. Couldn't stomach being there. Couldn't face the judgment, the pity, the confirmation of his failure. That night in his terrible hotel room, Dominic scrolled through social media, saw updates from his old life, friends at events he'd no longer be invited to, colleagues celebrating successes he'd never be part of, the world continuing beautifully without him. And Sienna. He found her gallery's Instagram. New show, new artists, reviews praising her curation, her eye, her ability to discover talent, photos of her at openings, smiling, radiant, free. In one photo, she stood with a man, Owen. The caption said, "Collaborative curator." They were laughing at something off camera. Comfortable, easy, the way Dominic and Sienna used to be before he'd stopped appreciating her. Jealousy flared hot and sharp, then shame. He had no right, no claim, no standing to feel anything about who Sienna spent time with. He'd given up that right when he'd chosen Vivienne, but God, it hurt, seeing her thrive, seeing her happy, seeing her better off without him, because that was the truth he'd been avoiding. Sienna didn't need him, had never needed him. She'd chosen to be with him, and when he'd proven himself unworthy of that choice, she'd chosen herself instead, had done the hard work of healing alone, had built a life that functioned perfectly without his presence. That made going back terrifying, because he wouldn't be returning as her equal, as the successful billionaire who'd swept her into a glamorous life. He'd be returning as a broken man, begging for mercy he didn't deserve, asking to be chosen by a woman who no longer needed to choose anyone. But the alternative was impossible. Living in this purgatory, this half-life of regret and isolation, this existence where every moment reminded him of what he'd lost and who he'd hurt and how spectacularly he'd failed. Weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks. Dominic worked, saved, tried to rebuild some fragment of financial stability. It was slow, painful, humbling, but gradually he was able to move from the hotel to a studio apartment. Small, modest, nothing like his former life. But it had a kitchen, a bathroom that wasn't shared, windows that let in light. He started therapy, couldn't afford much, but there were sliding scale options. A therapist who asked hard questions, who didn't let him hide behind excuses or rationalizations. What did you think you were getting from Vivienne that you weren't getting from Sienna? The therapist asked in their third session. Dominic had thought about this, wrestled with it. I felt necessary. Vivienne needed me. Sienna was so complete, so capable. I felt like an accessory in her life, not essential. And that bothered you? More than it should have, he admitted. I built my identity on being the one with answers, the problem solver, the hero. Sienna didn't need saving, didn't need me to fix her or rescue her or complete her. She was whole on her own. So you chose someone who needed you over someone who loved you. The words hit like a physical blow. Yeah, I guess I did. How did that work out? Dominic laughed. Bitter, broken, about as well as you'd expect. Turns out being needed isn't the same as being loved. Turns out people who desperately need you are often just using you. Turns out the woman who didn't need me but chose me anyway was the only one who actually loved me. What are you going to do with that knowledge? I don't know. Try to become someone worthy of being chosen again, maybe. Even if she never chooses me, at least become someone better than who I was. The therapy helped. Slowly, painfully. He was starting to understand his patterns, his ego, his need for external validation, the way he'd confused being necessary with being valued. Through all of it, one thought circled obsessively. Sienna. She was the center of gravity he couldn't escape. The North Star he'd abandoned and now desperately wanted to find his way back to. He drove past the penthouse sometimes. Couldn't help himself. Sat in his beat-up used car several blocks away, watching windows glow golden. Once he saw her silhouette, moving with that grace that made everything she did look effortless. She looked fine, happy, complete. The realization was devastating and clarifying. Sienna didn't need him to be whole. She'd done the hard work of healing, had built a life that functioned beautifully without him, had found strength in his absence rather than weakness. That made going back terrifying, because he had nothing to offer. No wealth, no status, no power, just a broken man who'd finally learned to value what he'd lost, who finally understood the difference between being needed and being loved. But the alternative, living without even trying, felt impossible. On a cold Tuesday evening, Dominic made a decision. He'd go to her, face her, accept whatever judgment she delivered, beg if necessary, grovel if required, lay himself bare and let her decide if he was worth any mercy at all. He showered, dressed in one of the few nice outfits he'd kept, looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was different from who he'd been. Thinner, older, humbled, broken in ways that might never fully heal, but maybe honest for the first time in years. The drive to the penthouse felt like swimming through concrete, every mile heavier than the last. His heart hammered, his hands were slick with sweat. Fear coursed through him with every breath. He parked in a guest spot. His old reserved space held an unfamiliar Mercedes. Did Sienna have someone new? The thought made his stomach clench, but he had no right to care, no claim to make, no standing to object. He rode the elevator, each floor feeling too fast and too slow simultaneously. Walked to the door that had once been his, stood there for a full minute, hand raised, unable to knock, terrified of what waited on the other side. But he'd come this far, lost everything, had nothing left to lose except the last shred of pride that had gotten him into this mess. Dominic knocked. 3 times. Firm, final, the sound of a man who'd made a choice and would face its consequences. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and there she was, Sienna. She wore simple clothes, cashmere and silk that suggested a comfortable evening at home. No makeup, no performance, no armor. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked like herself in a way she hadn't in the final months of their marriage. She looked free, and she wasn't surprised to see him. Her expression suggested she'd known he'd come eventually, had simply been waiting to see how long his pride would hold out. Dominic, she said his name. Neither warm nor cold, just factual. Sienna. His voice cracked on her name. Can I talk to you? She stepped aside, allowing him entry into the home he'd abandoned. Everything was the same, but different. The furniture, the art, the books, all familiar. But there were new elements, fresh flowers, a handmade pottery piece, a throw blanket in colors he'd never seen, small signs that life had continued and evolved without him. Sit. She gestured to the living room. He sat on the edge of the sofa, unable to relax, unable to pretend comfort. Sienna settled into the chair across from him, not beside him, not close, maintaining physical and emotional distance. You look terrible, she observed. Not cruel, just fact. I am terrible, he said quietly. I'm destroyed, humiliated, broken. Everything you knew would happen happened. Everything you warned me about without saying a word came true. I know. Sienna's voice remained calm, measured. I watched from a distance. Vivian was thorough. I expected nothing less. You gave her the weapons to destroy me. I gave her the information you'd hidden from me, the secrets you thought I didn't know about. The vulnerabilities you'd concealed. Sienna leaned back in her chair, completely composed. I simply ensured she had all the tools she needed to show you exactly who she was and who you'd become. Why? The question came out strangled. Why help her destroy me? Because you wouldn't have believed me if I'd told you. Sienna's eyes held his. Clear, devastating. If I'd shown you evidence of her manipulation, you would have thought I was jealous. If I'd warned you she was using you, you would have thought I was bitter. You needed to learn through experience what you refused to learn through love. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. I'm sorry. The words felt infinitely inadequate. God, Sienna, I'm so sorry. For leaving. For choosing ego over you. For being so blind. For taking you for granted. For everything. I know you are. She stood. Moved to the window. Her back to him. But being sorry isn't the same as being different. Regret is just pain at consequences. Change is becoming someone new. Then let me change. He stood too. Didn't move closer. Didn't presume to enter her space uninvited. Let me prove I can be the man you deserved all along. Sienna turned. For the first time, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the distant possibility of it. You left me for a woman who'd already destroyed you once, she said softly. You chose her need over my love. You valued being her hero more than being my partner. Do you understand what that did to me? I broke you. His voice was raw. I made you question your worth when you were the only thing of value I ever had. You did. She moved closer. He could smell her perfume. Subtle, elegant, the scent of home he'd abandoned. But I rebuilt myself, Dominic. I found my strength without you. I discovered I could be complete alone. And that's why this, she gestured between them, is different now. I don't need you. The words should have destroyed what remained of his hope. Instead, they illuminated something he'd been too proud to see. That's why I need to be chosen, he whispered. Not needed. Not depended on, but chosen. Freely. Without obligation. Because I'm worth choosing. Something in Sienna's expression softened microscopically. And are you worth choosing? I don't know. He admitted honestly. I've spent 6 weeks trying to become someone who might be, trying to rebuild not my empire or my reputation but my character, trying to understand the difference between being needed and being loved. She studied him for a long moment. He felt dissected under her gaze, examined for truth, assessed for authenticity. I kept your clothes, she said finally. The non sequitur confused him until she continued. They're still in your closet in the master bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to donate them or throw them away. Hope flared. Dangerous and painful. Does that mean? It means I'm a practical woman who saw no reason to waste perfectly good clothing. But her eyes held something warmer, something that looked almost like possibility. It doesn't mean you get to wear them here. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sienna. She held up a hand, stopping him. If, and this is a massive if, Dominic, if you want any part of my life again, it will be on my terms, not yours, never yours again. You will earn every moment of my time. You will prove every word you speak. You will rebuild what you destroyed, piece by piece, with no promises and no guarantees. Anything, he said frantically. Whatever it takes, however long it requires. There's a guest room, Sienna continued as if he hadn't spoken, 2 doors down from the master bedroom. You may stay there. Not here, not in our home as my husband, but as someone on probation, someone trying to earn their way back to something they destroyed. She moved past him toward that guest room. He followed, drawn by the gravitational force she'd always possessed, but he'd been too arrogant to acknowledge. The room was spare. A bed, a nightstand, a lamp, a window overlooking the city that had watched him fall from grace. You'll sleep here, Sienna said. You'll respect my space, my boundaries, my autonomy. You'll ask permission rather than assume access. You'll prove through action, not words, that you've changed. How long? He asked. How long until I know if there's a chance? However long it takes for me to see if your change is real or performative. She turned in the doorway, backlit by hallway light, looking like something divine and untouchable. I've given you access to this space, Dominic. Don't confuse that with forgiveness. Don't mistake proximity for reconciliation. I understand, he said, though understanding and accepting were different things. Do you? She tilted her head slightly. Because this isn't romantic. This isn't me taking you back with open arms. This is me being willing to observe whether the man I loved still exists under the fool you became. With that, she left him alone in the small room. Dominic stood there processing everything. The conditional second chance. The carefully maintained distance. The way Sienna had given him access without giving him assurance. It was more than he deserved, and less than he wanted. It was possibility without promise. It was hope wrapped in uncertainty. He had nothing to unpack. Just the clothes he wore. His phone. His wallet with almost nothing in it. The physical proof of how far he'd fallen. He sat on the edge of the bed. From this room, he could hear Sienna moving through the penthouse. Soft footsteps. Quiet domesticity. The evidence of a life that functioned beautifully without him. He'd lost everything. His money. His reputation. His certainty. His pride. But sitting in this guest room, closer to Sienna than he'd been in weeks, Dominic felt something he hadn't felt since before he'd left. The possibility of redemption. Whether he could earn it remained to be seen. Whether Sienna would grant it was entirely her decision. And for the first time in his life, Dominic Vale understood that being chosen was infinitely more valuable than being needed. That the woman who'd let him go with such elegant grace held all the power. As it should be. As it always should have been. Days passed in careful routine. Dominic woke early, made coffee for both of them, left Sienna's outside her bedroom door, never presuming to enter. Just a small gesture, consistent, daily, asking nothing in return. He worked, small consulting jobs, slowly rebuilding his finances from ruins, but more importantly, he worked on himself. Continued therapy, read books Sienna left casually where he'd see them, about emotional intelligence, about ego, about healthy relationships. He didn't know if she left them deliberately. Didn't ask. Just read them. Absorb them. Let them change him. Some evenings they'd have dinner together. Sienna would cook. Or he would. They'd sit at the table in careful civility, making conversation that avoided anything too deep. But gradually, carefully, they were learning each other again. Or maybe learning each other truly for the first time. Other evenings she'd tell him she had plans. He'd eat alone in the guest room, listen to her get ready and leave, wonder where she was going, force himself not to ask. Because he'd lost that right. Because trust had to be rebuilt through restraint as much as action. One evening Sienna came home and found Dominic in the kitchen, making dinner, not waiting for her to cook, not demanding to be fed, just quietly preparing a meal. You're cooking, she paused in the doorway. Trying to. He turned to face her. It's not as good as yours, but it's edible. She moved into the kitchen, examined his work. You never cooked when we were married. I should have. He met her eyes. You did everything. Ran the household, managed my life, held everything together while I took credit. I never appreciated how much you carried, how much work you did, how much you sacrificed. No, you didn't. I'm sorry for that. For all of it. For every moment I took you for granted. Are you apologizing because you mean it, or because you think it's what I want to hear? She leaned against the counter. Both. He admitted honestly. I mean it, but I also want you to hear it. Want you to know that I finally understand what I did, what I threw away, who I hurt. Something in her expression softened slightly. Set the table. They cooked together, moving around each other with cautious coordination, not the easy teamwork they'd once had, but something new being built on the ruins of something old. After dinner, as they cleaned up, Sienna spoke quietly. I've been watching you. Dominic's heart raced. And? You're trying. I'll give you that. You're working on your life, facing consequences, not running. She dried a plate slowly. But I still don't know if you've actually changed, or if you're just better at performing change. How do I prove the difference? Time, she said simply. Consistency. Being this person not just when I'm watching, but always. I am different. He turned to face her fully. Losing you showed me what matters. Being used by Vivian taught me the difference between love and manipulation. Being alone forced me to see who I am without someone propping me up. Pretty words. True words. She set down the dish towel, looked at him directly. Do you know what you did to me, Dominic? Really understand it? I hurt you. I abandoned you. You made me question my worth. She interrupted. You made me wonder if years of loyalty meant nothing. You broke something in me that I had to rebuild on my own. Her voice remained calm, but he could hear pain underneath. And I did rebuild it. I found my strength, my worth, my sense of self that didn't depend on being someone's wife. She moved closer. And that's why I don't need you anymore, Dominic. I did the hard work of healing. I'm complete without you. I know, he whispered. I see that. You're stronger now. You're incredible. So if you want back into my life, it's not because I need you. It's because I might choose you. If you prove you're worth choosing. She pulled something from her pocket. The cream-colored envelope. Or rather, a copy of it. The one she'd given Vivian. I meant what I said. I have copies. I know everything now. I see you completely. I'll never be blind again. You broke my trust completely, she continued. If it ever comes back, and that's a big if, it will never be what it was. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't romantic. This isn't me taking you back with open arms. This is me being willing to watch you try to earn something you destroyed. She turned back to the dishes. You'll sleep in the guest room tonight, and tomorrow night, maybe forever, you'll earn your way back slowly, painfully, honestly, with no shortcuts and no guarantees. However long it takes, he said. I'll wait. I'll work. I'll prove myself. Maybe. She moved toward the doorway, then paused, looking back at him with eyes that had seen him at his worst and his best. We'll see. Then she was gone, heading to her bedroom, leaving him with hope and the terrible weight of knowing he'd have to earn every moment of what came next. Dominic finished cleaning, returned to the guest room, lay in the small bed. He could hear Sienna in her room, living her life parallel to his but separate from it. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a happy ending. It was just a beginning, a chance, a maybe. And for the first time since he'd left, Dominic understood that maybe was more than he deserved. He fell asleep not in comfort, but in purpose. Tomorrow, he'd keep rebuilding, keep trying, keep proving that the man Sienna had loved still existed somewhere under the fool he'd become. Whether it would be enough, only time would tell. Whether Sienna would ever truly choose him again remained uncertain. But he was here, closer to her than he'd been in months, given a chance he absolutely didn't deserve, by a woman who'd turned his betrayal into his education, his abandonment into his awakening. Sienna lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, listening to Dominic settle into sleep down the hall. She'd known he'd come back, known he'd be broken, known he'd been. What she didn't know yet was whether breaking had actually changed him, or if he was just another man who mistook consequences for lessons, pain for growth, regret for transformation. Time would tell, and she had all the time in the world, because she'd learned something important, something his leaving had taught her. She didn't need him to complete her, which meant she could choose him if he proved worth choosing, or not, and either way, she'd be fine. That was the power he'd given her by leaving, the knowledge that she could survive without him, thrive without him, be whole without him. Now he'd have to prove he deserved to be chosen anyway, prove that love offered freely was more valuable than need demanded desperately, prove that he finally understood the difference. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, but either way, Sienna Crane would be exactly what she'd become in his absence. Strong, whole, free, complete. And if Dominic Vale wanted back into that life, he'd have to earn it. Every single day, with no guarantees, no promises, no assurances, just the possibility that a woman who'd been undervalued might choose to love again. If the man proved he'd learned to value what he'd lost, Sienna allowed herself a small smile in the darkness. She'd orchestrated everything, given Vivian the weapons, stepped back to watch, let Dominic destroy himself, let him learn through devastation what he'd refused to learn through devotion. And now he was back, humbled, broken, changed, maybe. Time would reveal the truth. And Sienna had nothing but time, nothing but patience, nothing but the quiet power of a woman who'd stopped begging and started choosing. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning. On her terms, in her time, by her rules, as it should be, as it always should have been. So let me ask you something. What would you do? If someone who destroyed you came back broken, begging for another chance, would you give it? Would you make them earn it like Sienna? Or would you close the door forever? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. Because this is more than a story. This is a question we all face. About forgiveness, about second chances, about whether people really change or just get better at pretending. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of your own worth, then do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Smash it. Because stories like this need to be told. Women like Sienna need to be celebrated. And men like Dominic need to understand that being needed isn't the same as being loved. Subscribe to Mr. Hearthline Stories. Turn on those notifications. Because we don't just tell stories here. We tell the truth. About love, about loss, about ego and grace, and the price of taking someone for granted. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been undervalued. Someone who's wondering if they should take back someone who left. Someone who needs to remember their worth. And remember this. Being chosen by someone who doesn't need you is worth infinitely more than being needed by someone who doesn't love you. Never settle for being someone's necessity when you could be someone's choice. Dominic Vale learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Through loss. Through humiliation. Through consequences that stripped away everything except truth. Sienna Crane taught it with elegance, with patience, with the quiet power of a woman who refused to beg, who armed her enemy and stepped back to watch, who let a man destroy himself rather than exhaust herself trying to save him from his own ego. That's strength. That's wisdom. That's the kind of love that knows when to hold on and when to let go, when to fight and when to step back and let consequences teach what words never could. So choose yourself first, always. Love people who see your worth. Value those who choose you freely. And if someone takes you for granted, let them learn what life looks like without you. Let them understand through absence what they refuse to appreciate through presence. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go. Let them make their mistakes. Let them face their consequences. Let them learn. And if they come back different, truly different, then you get to decide. On your terms, in your time, with your power. Just like Sienna, the queen who smiled while her kingdom burned, who packed her king's bags with grace, who drove him to his destruction with elegance, who armed his enemy and stepped back to watch him learn. That's the story. That's the lesson. That's the truth about love and ego and the price of undervaluing someone extraordinary. I'm Mr. Hearthline. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Now go choose yourself. Go value yourself. Go be the Sienna in your own story. And I'll see you in the next one.